Hello and welcome to What the Hey. Thank you for joining me to learn the answer to a question that I received, and when I go to my notebook of knowledge, I see that the question is written down as what the hey is Kroger, and this question comes from Caleb Tucker 7677, so hello to you, and thank you very much for the question. So if I had to give my own very basic answer and introduction to this question, I would say that Kroger is the, if not one of the biggest goods stores, retailers, and grocery chains in the United States. What Kroger typically relies on to keep its brand so big is efficiency as well as fairly low prices for its stores. And if you haven't heard of the name Kroger, you've probably heard of other names related to it, but I'll explain that later. So to actually start discussing this question, what I would like to begin with is kind of including a whole history section so you can kind of figure out Kroger's origins. And to start from the very beginning, the person who founded Kroger would be Bernard Kroger, who in 1883 founded Kroger in Cincinnati, Ohio for about $372. So one thing that is nice is that the name for Kroger is based off of Bernard Kroger's last name, which I can appreciate, it makes sense. And two, Bernard Kroger founded Kroger when he was 23, which is the same age I am right now, so that makes me feel a little sad, but still it's fine, it's cool. What's really cool is the fact that Bernard Kroger himself had an upbringing that revolved around selling goods and services related to food, so his whole experience with that helped him to create a really good grocery store. Because his parents were really hard-working immigrants, so they had a lot of experience with doing stuff with sauerkraut, different types of food, making bread and stuff. So Bernard kind of already had an idea of how to make food and do it efficiently. So as I already briefly mentioned, Kroger made the first Kroger in 1883, but then he made another store in 1884. And then a little bit later in 1902, Kroger decided to kind of merge a few businesses into one by making Kroger Grocery and Baking Company. So this is kind of transitioning out of the history section and going into a category that I dubbed firsts, which I had no idea this was the case, but Kroger as a grocery chain is kind of one of the first retailers that did a lot of the things that we find commonplace in most stores today. For example, Kroger was one of the first retailers to have both a meats and bakery section in 1901. They were also the first retailer to monitor the quality of their products and scientifically test them in the 1930s. They were the first retailer to add the electronic scanner in 1972, and then they also added beauty, pharmacy, and healthcare sections in the 1980s. So the next thing that I wanted to briefly discuss is the number of locations and types of locations, because there's quite a lot. So in general, you can find Krogers and Kroger-related places across 35 different states. There's about 2,800 different stores, around 2,256 different pharmacies, and around 1,585 supermarket fuel centers. So there's a lot of Kroger things. If you would like to know how much Kroger makes annually, it's about $132.5 billion. That's a lot of money. The next category of things that I wanted to talk about are things that people kind of relate and associate with Kroger. One of the first things being kind of their slogan in a way where it's fresh for everyone, which I would kind of hope is the thing, because when you go to a grocery store, you hope things are fresh. Another thing that you might know about Kroger are the Krogy characters, which I think they're those general corporate friendly mascots that you can see for pretty much anything. They're very round and colorful and cartoonish, but they're specifically called Krogys. It's Kroger emojis apparently, so very nice. Some of the things that people really like about Kroger, especially since they kind of started it, is the one-stop shop sort of deal, where it's as I explained, they have a meat section, they have a bakery section, there's beauty stuff there. Kroger was one of the first retailers to ever kind of do that, so people wouldn't have to go to individual stores, you wouldn't have to go to a butcher or something like that. It's all in one place, which is very nice. Kind of along with that, Kroger kind of started the self-service policy where like you wouldn't have to go into the store and have someone follow you around to help you shop, because if that was still a thing today, I would have so much anxiety and get so like, stressed about that. So I'm glad they started that. Like, sometimes it's nice to have help, but I don't want a person over my shoulder the whole time while I'm like trying to get like cookies or something. So that's great. So I kind of alluded to this earlier, but one of the reasons why Kroger makes so much money is because it technically owns a lot of other companies, so they're kind of like private labels in a way. Timeline-wise, starting in like 1938 and going all the way until like recently, like 2018, Kroger has purchased and like used other labels that you would think are individual places, but they're really not. Like there's Dillon's, there's Fred Meyer, Harris Teeter, as well as Roundy's. So they technically have like acquired other companies. You just don't know that that's the case because it's like a separate name. But Kroger has a lot of power in general. Some things that kind of relate to what I was talking about earlier in terms of efficiency are Kroger's Drone Express as well as their Q-Vision. Like the Drone Express apparently is literally just like getting your groceries from a drone, like anywhere, which is weird. And then Q-Vision, which they don't really go too much into depth about it on the website, is kind of like where it just makes the speed in which you check out like at the grocery store faster, like 30 seconds or something. So that's pretty efficient and pretty nice. Some things that people kind of applaud Kroger for, they have a couple programs that deal with like not wasting food and donating it to people. So people are like, okay, you make all this money and you kind of do something about it, so that's great. I didn't look into them too heavily, but it is kind of nice to know that big corporations are willing to do stuff like that. So in general, it's interesting. This next thing was really out of field for me, like I was not expecting it, but Kroger has something called Kroger Wireless, which is literally like you bring in a phone from Sprint or something, and then you have a phone plan with Kroger, which is like a grocery retail chain. You have a grocery store phone plan. Now this next thing's kind of upsetting, but in general there's a lot of reports that people who work for Kroger aren't paid very well, at least like basic employees. Which, you could argue that it's supposed to be like a part-time job, but there's a lot of reports where apparently like Kroger employees are like sleeping in their car after their shift, and it's like, that's not good. Which this kind of goes in line with it in a way, but Kroger is one of those stores where there's a thing called like the Ocado Fulfillment Center, where it's literally big warehouses of these little robots that pack, grocery orders. So there's a lot less jobs in that way. I mean, it's very efficient and it's very cool, but it's also kind of scary because it's like the jobs go bye-bye, robots say hi. Last piece of general information about Kroger, if you kind of want to interact with their different social media accounts, they do have a YouTube, they have a TikTok, an Instagram, a Facebook, an X, as well as a Pinterest. So if you want to follow them on any of those, you can. So now for this last part of the video, I just wanted to give my general opinion and feedback on the topic because I am fairly familiar with it to a nostalgic degree. When I was growing up, I lived in Georgia, and like maybe a minute or two out of our neighborhood, there was a Kroger there, so that's usually where my parents and family would go to get groceries. Being a small child, I never really had to consider how expensive things were. I always just knew that I liked going there because when you went to the bakery section, they had like free samples, and I really liked that. And I mean, where I live now, there's not a Kroger close to me at all. So like the most recent time I've gone was actually maybe a couple weeks ago when I visited some family like up north. So I went to a Kroger recently and it was actually kind of nice. Like everything was fairly organized. I would say that like experience was similar to a Publix. Like it was very neat. All the sections were like pretty helpful, so it was nice. There was also a noticeable difference between like regular Kroger stuff. Like there was a lot of discounts, so that was kind of nice because everything was clearly labeled. Like it wasn't an annoying experience. There wasn't like super bright lights. Like it was chill. I liked it. So in general, my whole affiliation with Kroger is simply from like being there as a customer on occasions and mainly just going there for like bakery free samples because that's the whole nostalgic aspect for me. I think they have those little cards you can get where you get like deals if you have an account with them or whatever, so maybe that's nice. I just don't know. But in general, Like, it was kind of nice to go to a Kroger recently, and it was also nice to like learn about like the entire history of it, because I didn't know that nowadays Kroger is practically like a monopoly, which whether or not that's a good thing, I don't know. Like, that's kind of scary and that's interesting. So if you have any thoughts about that, feel free to share. And to a degree, I kind of have an insider's perspective on the whole like Kroger owning a bunch of other companies, because I have someone who does advertising for like grocery things and they know a lot about it. So it's just interesting to hear how Kroger owns a lot more than I thought it did. But that's essentially the answer to the question. And if you want to look into some of the research further, or like just look into what I looked into, including a video that I watched and it was fun, I will have all of those sources listed in the description. So if you want to do some extra reading or whatever, you totally can. But I believe that is it. So thank you very much for watching. Bye!